July 27, 1943, 11:30 p.m. The night sky over Hamburg erupts in a spectacle of destruction unlike anything witnessed in human history. 722 Royal Air Force bombers have just dropped 2,300 tons of high explosives and incendiaries on Germany's second-largest city. But what happens next transcends ordinary bombing. It becomes something entirely new and terrifying. Thousands of individual fires merge into a single, massive conflagration. The superheated air creates powerful updrafts that suck oxygen from ground level, generating winds exceeding 150 miles per hour. Temperatures in the firestorm's core reach 1,470 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt glass, ignite asphalt, and turn human bodies to ash. The phenomenon is so powerful it creates its own weather system, with thunderstorms forming above the burning city. This is not the first night Hamburg has burned, nor will it be the last. Over 10 days and 8 separate raids, Allied bombers will drop nearly 9,000 tons of explosives on Hamburg, killing between 37,000 and 43,000 civilians, injuring 37,000 more, and leaving over 900,000 homeless. The firestorm of July 27-28 alone will claim approximately 18,000 lives in a single night. The operation's code name is biblical: Gomorrah, the city destroyed by divine fire for its wickedness. RAF Bomber Command and the United States Army Air Forces have chosen Hamburg as the testing ground for a new doctrine of strategic bombing, one designed not merely to destroy factories and military targets, but to break the will of an entire population through overwhelming, catastrophic violence. This is the story of Operation Gomorrah, the birth of the firestorm, and one of the most devastating bombing campaigns of World War II. By mid-1943, the Allied strategic bombing campaign against Germany had reached a critical juncture. For 3 years, RAF Bomber Command had launched night raids against German cities with mixed results. Accuracy remained poor. Studies showed that only 1 in 3 bombers placed their bombs within 5 miles of the target. Losses were mounting as German night fighters and anti-aircraft defenses grew more sophisticated. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, commander of RAF Bomber Command since February 1942, had become the leading advocate of area bombing, targeting entire cities rather than specific factories or installations. Harris believed that destroying German urban areas would cripple war production, disrupt transportation networks, and shatter civilian morale. His strategy was controversial even among Allied leadership, but the technological limitations of night bombing made precision attacks nearly impossible. The United States Army Air Forces, operating heavy bombers from bases in England since 1942, pursued a different doctrine. American commanders believed in precision daylight bombing, hitting specific industrial targets with heavy bombers protected by fighter escorts. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and consolidated B-24 Liberator, equipped with the Norden bombsight, would theoretically place bombs within bombing circles from high altitude in daylight. Reality proved less clean than theory. American daylight raids suffered horrific losses to German fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Without long-range escort fighters, bomber formations were vulnerable during deep penetration raids into Germany. The bloody missions to Schweinfurt and Regensburg in August 1943 would demonstrate the terrible cost of unescorted daylight bombing. Hamburg presented an ideal target for both air forces. Germany's second-largest city, with a population of 1.8 million, Hamburg was a major industrial center producing U-boats, ships, aircraft components, and refined petroleum. The city's location on the Elbe River, near the North Sea coast, made it relatively easy to find by navigation. Its sprawling urban area contained densely packed residential districts built largely of wood and brick, perfect kindling for incendiary attack. Harris had long planned a maximum-effort assault on Hamburg. His objective was simple and brutal: destroy the city so completely that German authorities would be forced to divert massive resources to relief efforts, evacuate the population, and suffer a catastrophic blow to war production and morale. He called it Operation Gomorrah, invoking the Old Testament city obliterated by fire and brimstone. The operation would combine RAF night attacks with USAAF daylight raids, maintaining round-the-clock pressure on Hamburg's defenses. Most crucially, the RAF would deploy a revolutionary new technology that promised to blind German radar defenses. Window, thin strips of aluminum foil that, when scattered in clouds, would create millions of false radar returns, rendering German ground control and airborne intercept radar useless. Window had been ready for deployment since April 1942, but Churchill's war cabinet had forbidden its use, fearing German retaliation against British cities using the same technology. By July 1943, with German air raids on Britain reduced to nuisance level and the strategic bombing campaign reaching maximum intensity, the decision was made. Window would debut over Hamburg. Hamburg in 1943 was a proud Hanseatic city with centuries of maritime tradition. The city's architecture reflected its mercantile wealth, elegant merchant houses, massive warehouse districts along the canals, ornate churches with copper-clad spires. The Alster lakes in the city center provided recreational space, while the massive harbor complex stretching along the Elbe handled merchant shipping and housed extensive shipbuilding facilities. The working-class districts of Hammerbrook, Ham, Rothenburgsort, and Billwater lay east of the city center. These neighborhoods housed dock workers, factory laborers, and their families in densely packed apartment blocks, many constructed in the late 19th century using timber frame construction covered with stucco. Streets were narrow. Courtyards were cramped. Wooden staircases connected apartments. These districts would become the epicenter of catastrophe. Hamburg's population had experienced air raids before. The first RAF attack came in May 1940. By July 1943, the city had endured over 50 raids, though most had been relatively light. Civil defense preparations were extensive. The city possessed over 1,400 public air raid shelters, including several massive bunker complexes with walls 6 feet thick designed to withstand direct hits. Residential cellars had been reinforced. Firewatch teams operated throughout the city. Emergency services were well organized and experienced. But Hamburg's defenses were designed for conventional bombing, not for what was coming. The city's fire department operated 1,350 firefighters with modern equipment. Auxiliary fire brigades added thousands of trained volunteers. Water mains crisscrossed the city. Fire breaks had been created in some districts. These preparations would prove completely inadequate against a firestorm. German military authorities had concentrated significant defenses around Hamburg. Anti-aircraft artillery included 54 heavy flak batteries, equipped with 88 and 105 guns capable of engaging bombers at high altitude. Hundreds of lighter 20 and 37 guns provided point defense. Searchlight batteries operated throughout the Hamburg region. The Luftwaffe maintained night fighter bases nearby, with squadrons of Messerschmitt Bf 110 and Junkers Ju 88 twin-engine fighters equipped with radar for nocturnal interception. Hamburg's civilian population lived under Nazi totalitarianism, subject to propaganda and political control. Many residents had never supported the Nazi regime. Others had become disillusioned as the war dragged on and casualties mounted. Still others remained committed to the Nazi cause, but all would suffer equally when the bombs fell. Operation Gomorrah began at 2:57 a.m. on July 25, 1943, when the first bombs fell on Hamburg. 791 RAF bombers, Lancasters, Halifaxes, Stirlings, and Wellingtons, attacked in a stream lasting approximately 2 hours. The raid employed Pathfinder aircraft using H-2S ground mapping radar to identify the target area and mark it with colored flares and incendiary bombs. For the first time in the war, RAF bombers released window, bundles of aluminum strips cut to half wavelength of German radar frequencies. As the bombers approached Hamburg, millions of metallic strips drifted down through the night sky, creating a blizzard of false returns on German radar screens. Ground controllers watched helplessly as their displays became useless, showing solid blocks of returns instead of individual aircraft. Night fighter pilots, guided to intercept positions by ground radar, found their own airborne intercept radars equally overwhelmed. The effect was devastating for German defenses. Night fighters circled aimlessly, unable to find targets. Anti-aircraft batteries fired blindly into the sky, guided by sound locators and visual observation rather than radar prediction. The carefully orchestrated night defense system collapsed into chaos. RAF bombers dropped approximately 2,300 tons of ordnance on Hamburg that night, two-thirds incendiaries and one-third high explosives. The high explosives blasted buildings apart, exposing wooden structures and creating gaps for incendiary penetration. The incendiaries, mainly 4-pound magnesium thermite sticks and 30-pound phosphorus bombs, ignited fires throughout the target area. The raid killed approximately 1,500 people and destroyed 200 acres of the city. Damage was concentrated in residential areas north of the city center. 16,000 people were bombed out of their homes, but compared to what was coming, this was merely the opening act. On July 25th and 26th, American B-17s of the 8th Air Force attacked Hamburg in daylight, targeting the port facilities, U-boat yards, and industrial plants. These precision raids, conducted at high altitude through heavy flak, achieved mixed results. Some bombs hit target areas, others fell in residential districts. The American raids kept pressure on Hamburg's defenses and denied German authorities any respite for recovery and repair. The second major RAF raid began on the night of July 27-28, 1943. 722 heavy bombers approached Hamburg carrying a specially designed bomb load, roughly half high explosives and half incendiaries, optimized to create maximum fire damage. Once again, window blinded German radar. Once again, the defenses were helpless. Weather conditions that night were crucial. Hamburg had experienced unusually hot, dry weather for weeks. Daytime temperatures exceeded 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity was low. Wooden structures throughout the city were tinder-dry. More critically, a high-pressure weather system created stable atmospheric conditions with little wind at ground level, perfect conditions for fire development. The raid began at 12:52 a.m. Pathfinder aircraft marked the aiming point in the eastern working-class districts of Hammerbrook, Hamm, and Rothenburgsort. The main bomber stream followed, dropping ordnance in a concentrated pattern over approximately 45 minutes. The bombing was remarkably accurate, with most bombs falling within 2 miles of the aiming point. Within minutes, thousands of individual fires erupted across the target area. Under normal circumstances, each fire would burn independently, perhaps spreading to adjacent buildings. But tonight, conditions aligned to create something unprecedented. As fires multiplied, they began merging. The combined heat created powerful updrafts, drawing air from surrounding areas toward the fire center. At ground level, fresh air rushed inward to replace rising heated air. As more fires merged, the updrafts intensified. The inrushing air accelerated into winds. The winds fanned the flames, increasing fire intensity, creating stronger updrafts, drawing in more air. The positive feedback loop escalated beyond any previous fire experience. Within 30 minutes of the first bombs falling, a fully developed firestorm raged across 8 square miles of Hamburg. Ground-level winds reached 150 miles per hour, hurricane force, rushing toward the fire center. Temperatures in the firestorm core exceeded 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. The firestorm created its own meteorology. The massive updraft carried smoke, ash, and superheated air to altitudes of 30,000 feet. Moisture in the rising air condensed, forming cumulonimbus clouds above the burning city. Electrical discharges, lightning, crackled through the smoke column. RAF bomber crews reported being able to read maps by the light of the burning city from miles away. At ground level, conditions were apocalyptic. The hurricane-force winds uprooted trees, overturned vehicles, and tore shutters from buildings. People attempting to flee were blown off their feet and swept into the flames. The superheated air ignited everything combustible: clothing, hair, wood, rubber, even asphalt pavement. Glass windows melted and ran like water. Metal structures sagged and collapsed. The firestorm's most lethal characteristic was oxygen depletion. The massive combustion consumed oxygen from a wide area. In basements and shelters, people suffocated as the fire overhead drew air from every opening. Rescuers later found families dead in shelters, unmarked by fire but killed by carbon monoxide poisoning and oxygen starvation. Bodies were found sitting peacefully, as if asleep, killed instantly when oxygen vanished. Those who attempted to flee often fared worse. The streets became death traps. Asphalt melted into sticky tar that trapped feet. Radiant heat from buildings ignited clothing at a distance. The hurricane winds hurled people into flames or against burning structures. Canals and water basins filled with people seeking refuge, only to die when the water heated to boiling or oxygen depletion reached even these open spaces. The firestorm burned with uncontrollable intensity for approximately 3 hours. As fuel was exhausted in the core area, the fire gradually subsided. When dawn broke on July 28th, 8 square miles of Hamburg had been reduced to ash and rubble. The working-class districts of Hammerbrook, Hamm, and Rothenburgsort had virtually ceased to exist. Casualty estimates for the firestorm night vary, but approximately 18,000 to 20,000 people died, more than in any previous air raid in history. The death toll would have been higher, but the first raid on July 24-25 had prompted many residents to evacuate. Those who remained, believing the worst was over, paid the ultimate price. Hamburg's agony did not end with the firestorm. RAF Bomber Command returned on the night of July 29-30 with 777 aircraft attacking through thunderstorms and heavy weather. The raid scattered, losing concentration, and achieved less destruction than previous attacks. Approximately 800 people died, a fraction of the firestorm casualties, but adding to the city's cumulative devastation. American B-17s continued daylight raids when weather permitted, maintaining pressure on Hamburg's industrial facilities. On August 2-3, the RAF launched its final major raid of Operation Gomorrah. 740 bombers attacked, but the raid suffered from poor weather and reduced concentration. Approximately 370 people died. By August 3, 1943, Operation Gomorrah officially ended. In 10 days, Allied bombers had flown approximately 3,000 sorties against Hamburg, dropping nearly 9,000 tons of bombs. The city had burned for a week. Approximately 40,000 civilians were dead, though exact figures remain disputed. Another 37,000 were wounded. Over 900,000 people, half the city's population, were homeless. Approximately 40,000 residential buildings had been destroyed, along with 2,632 commercial buildings, 580 industrial facilities, and 24 hospitals. Hamburg's fire department lost 83 firefighters killed and hundreds injured. Police, civil defense workers, medical personnel, and emergency services suffered heavy casualties. The bodies of many victims were never recovered, incinerated completely in the firestorm's extreme heat. Mass graves received thousands of corpses that could not be individually identified. The scene that greeted survivors on the morning of July 28th defied comprehension. The eastern districts had become a landscape from hell, acre after acre of rubble, twisted metal, and ash. Multi-story apartment buildings were reduced to basement level. Trees stood as charred skeletons. The rubble was still hot days later, making search and rescue operations impossible in many areas. Bodies lay everywhere. Some were recognizable, killed by blast or building collapse. Others were burned beyond recognition. In the firestorm area, many victims had simply vanished, reduced to ash or small fragments of bone. Rescue teams found mass deaths in shelters, dozens of people suffocated together, their bodies showing no external injury. The smell was indescribable. Burning had ceased, but the stench of death, charred wood, and chemicals permeated everything. Smoke continued rising from hot spots in the rubble. Emergency workers wore masks, but nothing could filter the overwhelming odor of destruction. Hamburg's infrastructure collapsed. Water mains were shattered, making firefighting impossible. Electrical power was out across vast areas. Gas lines were ruptured, creating ongoing fire and explosion hazards. Telephone communications failed. Streets were blocked with rubble. The transportation system ground to a halt as rail lines, tramways, and roads became impassable. The psychological impact proved nearly as devastating as the physical destruction. Survivors wandered in shock, searching for missing family members. Children were separated from parents in the chaos of evacuation. Elderly residents, unable to flee, perished in disproportionate numbers. The social fabric of entire neighborhoods disintegrated as people scattered to anywhere that offered safety. Nazi authorities struggled to maintain control. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels visited Hamburg and was shocked by the scale of devastation. He recognized immediately that such destruction threatened civilian morale across Germany. The regime mobilized resources for relief efforts while simultaneously suppressing information about the true extent of the catastrophe. Evacuation became the priority. Trains, buses, and trucks carried refugees out of Hamburg to surrounding regions. By August 1943, approximately 900,000 people had left the city, more than half the pre-raid population. Some returned weeks or months later. Many never came back. Germany's wartime economy absorbed the displaced population, but the strain on resources was immense. Hamburg's war production suffered severely, but did not collapse entirely. Submarine construction at the Blome and Voss shipyards continued, though at reduced capacity. Many smaller industries and workshops were destroyed completely. Overall industrial production in Hamburg dropped approximately 20% in the months following Gomorrah, recovering gradually as factories were rebuilt or operations relocated. The firestorm's effect on German morale was significant but not decisive. Nazi propaganda worked to frame the bombing as enemy barbarity, strengthening rather than weakening determination to fight. But privately, many Germans, including some Nazi officials, began questioning whether Germany could win a war that brought such destruction to its cities. Operation Gomorrah achieved its tactical objectives. Hamburg suffered catastrophic damage. Casualties were enormous. War production declined. The city's population was traumatized and dispersed. RAF Bomber Command had demonstrated that properly executed area bombing could destroy a major city in a matter of days. But the strategic question remained. Did Operation Gomorrah contribute meaningfully to winning the war? This question generated fierce debate then and continues to divide historians today. Proponents of strategic bombing, led by Air Chief Marshal Harris, argued that sustained area bombing forced Germany to divert massive resources to civil defense, anti-aircraft guns, fighter aircraft, and reconstruction, resources that could not be used on the Eastern Front or elsewhere. The bombing campaign tied down hundreds of thousands of workers in repair and reconstruction. It forced the dispersal of industry, reducing efficiency. It strained transportation networks needed for military logistics. Critics countered that strategic bombing achieved less than promised at enormous cost. German war production actually increased from 1943 through 1944, despite intensifying bombing. German morale, rather than breaking, often hardened in response to bombing. The resources devoted to the bombing campaign, tens of thousands of aircraft, hundreds of thousands of aircrew, massive industrial production, might have been more effectively employed in other operations. The human cost was undeniable. In Operation Gomorrah alone, approximately 40,000 German civilians died, more than all British civilian casualties from German bombing throughout the entire war. Over the course of the war, Allied strategic bombing killed approximately 600,000 German civilians. These figures raised profound moral and ethical questions about the nature of modern warfare. The firestorm phenomenon, first fully manifested at Hamburg, would be repeated in other raids. The February 1945 bombing of Dresden created another firestorm, killing 25,000. The March 1945 Tokyo firebombing generated a firestorm that killed over 100,000 in a single night. Allied bombing planners had learned to create firestorms deliberately, optimizing bomb loads and target selection to maximize fire development. Behind the statistics lie individual stories of terror and survival. Trotty, a 16-year-old girl, remembered the firestorm night. The heat was unbearable. People's clothes were on fire. We ran through streets where the asphalt was melting. My friend's hair caught fire and I tried to put it out with my bare hands. Kurt, a firefighter, described impossible conditions. We couldn't fight the fires. The heat drove us back hundreds of meters. The wind was so strong we couldn't stand. Water from our hoses evaporated before reaching the flames. We just tried to save whoever we could find alive. Margaret, who lost her entire family, recalled, "I was at my aunt's house outside the city that night. My mother, father, and 3 sisters were in our apartment in Hammerbrook. I never saw them again. The apartment building was gone, just rubble and ash. We never found any remains." Hans, an air raid warden, witnessed the firestorm from its edge. It looked like the end of the world. The entire sky was red. The wind was like a hurricane, pulling everything toward the fire. I saw people trying to run away, but the wind dragged them back into the flames. I saw a woman holding a baby, and then they were just gone, swept away. These personal accounts, multiplied across thousands of families, represent the human reality behind strategic calculations and military objectives. Each casualty statistic represented a person, a child, a parent, a grandparent, with hopes, fears, and dreams extinguished in the flames. Operation Gomorrah stands as a watershed moment in the history of warfare. It demonstrated that modern industrial societies, for all their organizational sophistication and technological advancement, remained vulnerable to catastrophic destruction from the air. The firestorm phenomenon revealed that under certain conditions, bombing could create destruction far exceeding the sum of individual weapons employed. The operation vindicated Air Chief Marshal Harris's belief that area bombing could destroy cities, though it did not prove his larger claim that bombing alone could win the war. Hamburg recovered, war production resumed, and Germany fought on for nearly 2 more years. The strategic bombing campaign would intensify through 1944 and 1945, culminating in attacks of even greater destructive power, but it never achieved the decisive victory its advocates promised. The moral and ethical dimensions of Operation Gomorrah remain contentious. Was it justified as a legitimate military operation against a nation waging aggressive war and committing genocide? Or did it cross moral boundaries, deliberately targeting civilians in ways that violated the principles of proportionality and discrimination that should govern even wartime conduct? These questions have no easy answers. The war Hamburg helped support through its industries and shipyards was a war of conquest and extermination. The Nazi regime that governed Hamburg committed crimes of unprecedented magnitude. Yet the civilians who died in the flames, the children, the elderly, the workers, were not personally responsible for these crimes, even if they lived in a society that enabled them. What is certain is that Operation Gomorrah demonstrated the terrible power of modern warfare to inflict mass casualties on civilian populations. The firestorm of Hamburg foreshadowed the nuclear age, showing that conventional weapons, properly employed, could achieve destruction rivaling atomic weapons. When the atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 2 years later, they represented a technological leap, but not a fundamental change in kind from what had already been done to Hamburg, Dresden, and Tokyo. The ruins of Hamburg were eventually cleared. The city was rebuilt. Today, Hamburg is once again a prosperous, vibrant metropolis. But the memory of July 1943 persists. Memorials mark sites of mass death. Archives preserve testimony from survivors. Historical debates continue about the necessity, effectiveness, and morality of the bombing campaign. Operation Gomorrah reminds us that the choices made in war have consequences that echo across generations. The firestorm lasted only a few hours, but its legacy endures as a powerful warning about the destructive potential of modern warfare and the terrible price paid by those who find themselves beneath the bombs.